President Chin, we're ready to begin.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our second meeting of the trustee area elections. This is a special meeting of the San Mateo Foster City School District Board of Trustees. Today is Monday, August 16th, and I'm calling the meeting to order at 5:31. First order of business is our flag salute. If everyone would please get the flag, and we'll start with our flag salute. All right. Ready, begin. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. It's always awkward when you start getting messages during Pledge of Allegiance. So next up is roll call. Trustee Corzo.
Here.
Great. Trustee Proctor.
Here.
Trustee Watkins.
Here.
And Trustee Warren is under the weather, and we wish her all the best as she recovers health-wise, and I am here as well. So we are here, four of us are here today. Trustee Corzo, would you mind doing the announcement before we translation announcement, please?
Sure. Bienvenidos a todos que están presentes. Si ocupan traducción, por favor, levanten su mano o usen el símbolo del mundo en su pantalla para cambiar la idioma a español. Gracias.
Great, thank you, Trustee Corzo. Next on our agenda is the approval of tonight's agenda, the August 16th, 2021. Does anyone have any changes or on the agenda?
I had one comment. So normally we do public comment for each item, but tonight's agenda is broken up a little differently where there's 4 different items under section 6. So I was wondering if we might want to just combine it into all of one item so we could hear the whole presentation and do public comment all at once on this topic.
Great, that sounds fine to me. Do you want to make a motion unless there's, and then to do that?
Sure. I'll make a motion to combine 6.1 through 6.4 all in one item so that we could do it like we normally do.
Great, I know it's all related. Does anyone want to second that motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Trustee Watkins. Roll call vote, Trustee Corzo.
Yes.
Trustee Proctor.
Yes.
Trustee Watkins.
Yes.
And I'll vote yes as well. So we have combined all of items 6.1 through 6.4 into one item. It's all related to the trustee area elections. Okay, moving on to 5.1. This is the time where we are calling for public comment for items not on tonight's agenda, which really is any comment not relating to the trustee area elections. So Diane, would you mind opening public comment on 5.1, please?
Yes, to our attendees, if you would like to address the board this evening, you have 3 minutes to address the board on a non-agenda item. Please use the Zoom functionality at the bottom of your screen. Randy, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening. I wanted to address some of the comments that were made by a few of the board members in the last public hearing that was held on August 6th. And there were a few concerning views that were expressed really toward the constituents and toward the public that I just wanted to elevate. So one of those things is that any potential candidates that are not incumbents would not have the interests of all of the district in mind, but rather would only be focused on their particular district. I think that is really selling short your constituents and the members of the public. that I think it's very, very disrespectful. And I would advise you to reconsider. There are a lot of people that consider the entire community and think even beyond the community, and certainly don't think just with across their district. It kind of, I mean, how that comes across is you putting yourselves in a higher position than everyone else. It's really off-putting. The second thing is about the intention behind the redistricting, or the districting, right? The trustee-based elections. And I'm wholly on board with this, that of giving more political power to historically excluded communities. Absolutely. And, you know, the mechanism for this, and this is one mechanism, right? Which is lowering barriers to getting elected. Instead of having to run these school district-wide elections, making those constraints smaller. You have had opportunities to lower those barriers previously, and you've not taken those. You're cherry picking previous events, previous elections, and you're not looking at the entire constellation. Back when Noelia and Shara were elected, there was a district-run event that presented what was the process for getting elected. And that was extremely useful. And look, we got two historically underrepresented minorities to the board. I asked for such a session to be held 2 years later, and the district or the board didn't choose to do that. And then 2 years later, again, you guys didn't do anything to promote that. When barriers are lowered, for example, when the seat came open that Ken was appointed to, we see that there is substantial interest. So take a look at the data. There is interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Next, we will have Scott Rafferty. Scott, please go ahead. Scott, would you, oh, sorry. Scott, please go ahead.
Yeah, following on the theme of the previous speaker, I guess this is actually addressing something you just did. But one of the problems with the last hearing was that a lot of new issues were raised by your demographer, to which there was really no opportunity for public comment. And much of it was actually misrepresentation. So I had hoped that you would expand the opportunities for public comment and try to create a more interactive communication with your community today. It's not like last hearing where you only had 2 public comments, and as issues were raised during the course of the board discussion and interaction with the demographer, there was no opportunity to respond. And yet you just amended your agenda so that there's even less public input. And I think this goes to some really fundamental problems with this process. First of all, Board Chair Chin owes an apology to all of his constituents for saying that this is being done under a threat of litigation. That's absolutely not true. And this is an issue that I'm sure your council has briefed you on. You were petitioned to cooperate in a process to bring about voluntary compliance, and you're trying to end run the process by submitting a map to the county committee that is based on data that is obsolete, data that last week was replaced with 2020 census data. And that's not legal. That's not going to work. And you just seem to be defying your constituents here. And I think that's a real mistake. This didn't have to be an adversary process. It's still not an adversary process, except to the extent you make it that. Trustee Corzo had some very trenchant observations, as did Trustee Watkins, and I communicated with the superintendent about it. I expected there to be some positive movement from the demographer. Instead, we get these maps that are verging on unintelligible. I mean, several of them say there are no Asian Americans anywhere in the district. They have the most Latino friendly map has 3 of you in one district and 2 of you in another. And everybody knows that's not going to happen. This is just a stunt that you were doing. You're trying to get something shoved through the county committee, and you're going to come back in the dead of night and replace it with something totally different. And frankly, it kind of stinks. And I think you need to own up to that, and you need to have a more interactive communication with your constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. President Chin, we have no additional hands at this time.
Great, thank you, Diane. Thank you for those who provided comments on topics that were not on tonight's agenda, but the comments were on tonight's agenda item. That's okay, because there will be another opportunity for further comment. We are moving on to item 6.1, which is basically the entire trustee area elections. So as per our normal process, we will start with staff presentation, go to clarifying questions by the board, and then we'll open up to public comment, and then I will close public comment, and then the board will discuss the maps and provide any direction as needed. Superintendent Ochoa, would you mind starting us off, please?
Of course, thank you, President Chin. This is where I step in. Tonight's summary of the process is similar to the comments and the remarks that were made at our last public hearing, which was August 6th, 2021. And it began with a resolution of intent in response to a petition to change the method for electing the San Mateo Foster City School District trustees, submitted by attorney Scott Rafferty. The district followed with the adoption of resolution number 34/20-21, stating intent of the Board of Trustees to transition from an at-large to a by-trustee election system on June 10th, 2021. The adoption of the resolution of intent started a 90-day window of time from the passage in which a prospective is barred from bringing legal action against the district for alleged violations of the California Voting Rights Act. Step 2 was the initial public hearings. Prior to drafting of the maps, the district was required to hold 2 public hearings within 30 days of one another to receive community comments and public testimony concerning the composition of potential trustee voting areas associated with the board's transition to a by-trustee area election system. These 2 initial public hearings were held on June 22nd, 2021 at 5 p.m. and a week later on June 29th, 2021 at 7 p.m. Step 3 of the process was the drafting of maps and hearings on the drafted maps. A public entity such as the district must publish at least 1 proposed trustee area map for consideration by the community and must hold at least 2 additional public hearings over a 45-day period to gather input on proposed maps and election sequencing. The district timely published 4 draft maps, which were located on and still are at the district's website dedicated to the transition process. Printed copies of those maps are also available for inspection at the district office located at 1170 Chest Drive, Foster City, California, 94404 upon request. The public hearings on the draft maps were noticed and scheduled for August 6th, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. and August 16th, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. and August 26th, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. Final maps must be posted for 7 days prior to any hearing adopting a map, and that is the next step in the process for map adoption. From there, it moves the process forward to the County Committee on School District Organization. And once the board selects and adopts a prospective map, the County Committee must hold an additional public hearing within district boundaries in order to consider and approve, consider approval of the board selected map. If the county committee approves such a proposal, then an election is called seeking voter approval for the transition to by trustee area unless a waiver of election requirement is sought by the district. Referencing specifically that State Board of Education waiver of election requirement, voter approval of the transition to a by trustee area system is waivable if the district submits such application to the State Board of Education regarding the election requirement. On June 28th, 2021 at 6 p.m., the district held a public hearing on a waiver application for the election requirement in order to finalize the transition process. At the conclusion of the public hearing, the board adopted resolution number 40/20-21, which authorized the superintendent to seek a waiver from the State Board of Education regarding the election requirement. On June 29th, 2021, the district submitted the application for waiver of the election requirement, which the State Board of Education will consider during its September 9th, 2021 meeting. And regarding 2022 elections, it is hoped and anticipated that the district will have completed this process within the required 90-day period and hold its first by trustee area elections as part of the 2022 elections. So that's my summary for you tonight, President Chin and members of the board. And with that, I'll pass it back to you folks.
Great, thank you. And I know we have county counsel on the line and the consultant. Would you, I don't know, county counsel, do you want to go ahead and then bring in the consultant, or I'll leave it up to you guys to decide who wants to go first?
Sure, thank you, Board President Chen and honorable members of the board, Superintendent Ochoa, and members of the San Mateo Foster City community. We'll go over a brief overview, similar to what Superintendent Ochoa just provided, but with a little bit more information as it relates to the overall process. And after that, we will turn it back over to the board, who will engage with further public comment from the community and with any questions they may have for Dr. Douglas Johnson, our demographer, or the district's demographer from National Demographic Incorporated. So without further delay, we'll go ahead and go into that presentation. Okay, so tonight's public hearings are related to the draft trustee maps in relation to the transition to a by trustee area election system. A recap of the CVRA, the California Voting Rights Act, shows that it is essentially modeled after the Federal Voting Rights Act, which was passed in 1965. And the Federal Voting Rights Act was intended to ensure that local jurisdictions do not utilize voting systems that deprive minority voters of their political power. California enacted its own version of the Federal Voting Rights Act much later in 2001. And again, it's coined the CVRA, the California Voting Rights Act. And the key takeaways from the California Voting Rights Act are that the CVRA prohibits the use of any election system that impairs the ability of a protected class to elect candidates of its choice or its ability to influence the outcome of an election. Jurisdictions can be sued, such as San Mateo Foster City, if they elect their governing body using an at-large system, at-large election system, and if they fail to make the transition, which is a favorable transition to a by trustee area election system. If a court were to find against a jurisdiction that the jurisdiction must change its election system, it will also be subject to significant attorney's fees for any plaintiffs that might have brought a legal action against the public entity, in this case, the district. Key question that's often asked is how will this transition affect voters? Well, if approved, registered voters in the school district boundaries will have the opportunity to vote for a candidate for the school board who lives in their by trustee area. And by there, I'm talking about the constituents, the members of the community. Registered voters will not be able to vote for school board candidates from another trustee area. So in other words, if an individual lives in, say, trustee area 1, they will not be able to vote for trustee in trustee area 5. To recap on the process that Superintendent Ochoa just described, in San Mateo Foster City's case, the district or the board adopted its resolution of intent on June 10, 2021. And as stated by Superintendent Ochoa, the change was prompted by a petition that was submitted on behalf of potential plaintiffs, which live within your district, who are represented by Attorney Scott Rafferty, who did provide public comment a little while ago. After the passage of the adoption of the resolution of intent, the district was required to hold 2 public hearings. And the initial 2 public hearings were to be held or required to be held prior to drafting of any maps. And the purpose of those hearings were to educate the public and to obtain solicitation from the district's communities as it relates to the process and to the eventual map drawing procedures. On July 29th, the district released its initial draft maps, which consisted of 4 maps. 3 maps that were based on a 5-member board, 1 map that was based on a 7-member board. And the 7-member board map was drawn at the request and actually as a result of public input and community input regarding the process. Pursuant to law, at least 2 public hearings must be held within 45 days of each other to discuss and revise maps based on public and community input. And this will also include the sequencing of elections. The scheduled public hearings were and are for August 6th, which already occurred, for August 16th, which is today, and for August 26th. Please know that during today's public hearing, the board will not be taking action and adopting a map today. That's not the intent. The intent is to go through the rest of the maps and the previous maps to ensure that the community is given every opportunity to provide the input that they so desire and to provide their thoughts on how district lines should be drawn. The board anticipates, but it's not solid, but the board does anticipate to adopt the map on March 26th. Final maps must be posted at least 7 days prior to any hearing in which a map will be adopted.
August 26th. You said March.
My mistake. August 26th. I appreciate President Chen. After the board adopts a final map, the process then goes to the County Committee on School District Organization. And the County Committee on School District Organization is required to hold a public hearing within district boundaries to consider and approve the board selected map. Prior to March 1st, 2022, trustee areas must be revised in order to reflect what's considered validated 2020 census data. And that will complete the process for this transition. Again, the process in San Mateo Foster City's case has a 90-day period of time under the safe harbor period to make the changes and to hopefully shield the district, or at least not have the district be involved in any prolonged litigation. On November 20, in November 2022, the district hopes to hold its first by-trustee area elections. The purpose of tonight's hearing is the following. It is a hearing at which the public is invited to provide input regarding the content of the draft maps and proposed sequence of elections. This includes talking to the board and letting them know what you believe should be considered when drawing the maps. After completing a demographic study of the district, National Demographic Corporation initially drafted 4 maps based on previous public input. After the August 6th public hearing, the board gave direction to the demographer, Dr. Douglas Johnson, to produce additional maps. 2 would be based on the 5-member trustee board. 1 would be based again on the 7-member trustee board. And that again was based on public comment and on direction of the board. At this public hearing, the trustees will have the opportunity to review the draft maps, to receive and hear public comment regarding the maps, and to provide further input for further consideration on any adjustments or any revisions that need to be made on any of the maps prior to the board formally taking action. The criteria that will be used to select the final map is as follows. The board will consider a range of factors, including but not limited to equal population, communities of interest, compactness, visible boundaries, respect of voters' wishes, and other local considerations such as school boundaries and locations of school sites, as these are all things that were brought to the board's attention. A community of interest. While community of interest is defined as any distinctive area within the school district boundaries that has a definable group of people or unique geography or some other type of distinguishable feature or characteristic that it would be undesirable to divide in creating a bi-trustee area. Some of these may already be clearly established, others may be defined as a result of this process. The distinction requires strong community input to ensure that communities of interest are protected in this process. Things that are often considered are school attendance areas, natural neighborhood dividing lines, areas around parks or other landmarks, common issues or activities or concerns, and shared demographic characteristics such as socioeconomic status, education level, or even linguistic isolation. Question that's asked is, will all 5 governing board member seats be open for election at the next district's general election? And the answer to that is no. Currently, the district will have 2 governing board seats up for election during its first bi-trustee area election. And next, we have a series of maps. 3 maps, 201, 202, and 203, were previously drafted and discussed during the August 6th public hearing, but the board will definitely take input and comments on any of those maps if so desired. As a result of public input and guidance from the board, and excuse me, direction from the board, 3 additional maps are created. Map 204, map 205, and map 702. Map 701 was also one of the initial 4 maps that was previously discussed, but again, it's available for further discussion. These maps and the demographic data that supports the maps are all published on the district's website, and they're all hyperlinked, and the public is not only invited, but encouraged to look through, examine, and review the maps and the data. There's also a link for an interactive map where a member of the community could input their own address and see where they would fall in any of the prospective map areas. And with that, I do turn it back over to you, President Chen.
Great, thank you. I don't know if the consultant, Doug, if you wanted to comment on any of the changes that were made from our previous meeting.
Sure, happy to. And I'll be brief because hopefully people have had time to look at the maps. But in the regional maps, 201 and 202, they were very regional, kind of stacked from north to south. And then 203 was very driven by attendance zones. The feedback we got at the last hearing from the public was the attendance zone approach didn't really make sense for the district. But there was a lot of talk about North Central San Mateo. Could that be united, and concern that that was divided? And then there was also a discussion of Foster City and how it's divided. So the 2 new maps, 204 and 205, are identical up in Trustee Area 4, which is the new unified North Central San Mateo area. And then where they differ is in 2 respects. Number 1, once I draw that trustee area, then trustee area 4, the San Mateo Park, Baywood area, and 5 have to kind of work out how they get to population balance within the remaining area. And so each one is just a very different approach to how 3 and 5 come together and divide up the remaining area west of the freeway.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but it'd be super helpful to like see the maps as you're talking about them.
Oh,
Is that
sure.
possible? Thank you.
Definitely, I can do that. Share the screen. I'll show. This is the interactive map that was just mentioned. So 204 and 205. One of the nice things about this map is you can overlay multiple maps, and where it's a solid bright color, as Trustee Area 4 is, that means it's the same in both maps. And then the green is also the same in both maps for Area 3, but where there's a mix of shading, that shows the difference. So first of all, in 204, you can see 3 comes down the San Mateo Park, Baywood, and then shifts east of El Camino Real / Highway 82 and picks up the area between the freeway and El Camino Real. 205, it comes down more south. It still picks up the area north of Highway 92, but it comes more south of west of El Camino Real. And 5 picks up the south part of town and then the area between the El Camino Real and the freeway. So west of the freeway, that's a big change. Area 4 is the same, kind of united as much as possible, north central San Mateo trustee area, and then 3 next to it, 5 coming in from Highlands, and they differ in where they mix. East of the freeway, there's also a difference. This is the discussion in Foster City of exactly how the lines go. 205 keeps Edgewater and then up to the city border as a boundary. As a reminder, last time we talked about Foster City as a city is too big to be a trustee area by itself. So some piece of its population needs to come out. In contrast, 204, the goal was to use the slough and not come over to Edgewater. Turned out population-wise that wasn't possible, but at least down below Beach Park, it was possible. Then we still had to switch over to Edgewater. And the way we were able to move the southern part there over is by using East Hillsdale Boulevard as a boundary as far as we could. Once we get to where you see in this map, the blue and the red trustee areas, area 1 and 2. Then this is one giant census block wrapping around the outside of the city. So that's as far as we could follow Hillsdale Boulevard. I would note that the 2 sides of the freeway are kind of interchangeable. So if people prefer the Foster City side of 204 and the western side of 205, we can just put those 2 pieces together into a map if that's the way you want to go. Then in terms of the other new map, briefly, we had 710 before. I'm sorry, 701 before. Now we have 702. You'll see, obviously, with 7 trustee areas, the trustee areas are much smaller. So the north central San Mateo seat, trustee area 4, only comes down to 3rd Avenue. But again, it unites everything between the freeway and El Camino Real, and then the other seats kind of wrap around it. And with area 6, we also stay between the freeway and El Camino Real, all the way down to the southern point where it does have to cross over purely for population balancing reasons. Similarly, over in Foster City, 702 has a more compact kind of southwestern Foster City, and then going into San Mateo to the freeway, as opposed to the old approach that had more of a division of Foster City, was everything south of Highway 92. So different options. Again, especially with the 5-seat maps, we can interchange the east and west if there is a preference for 204 on one side and 205 on the other side. But happy to discuss any changes or any details that you like to review. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Doug. If you would, yes, thank you. Thank you for those presentations and your response to our comments and public's comments at our last meeting. Before we get to public comment on this item, we normally do, clarifying questions from the board. Does anybody have any quick clarifying questions they'd like to ask before we get to public comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify.
You're on mute.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask about how and when we'll be integrating the 2020 census data.
Mr. Padilla, do you want to answer that, or would you like me to?
Go ahead, Doug, and I'll follow up with support.
Sure. So the law is that we have to use, that all school districts who are updating their lines following the census have to use data that's been validated by the State Department of Finance Demographic Research Unit. And so that data will be released sometime in mid to late September. We did just get the 2020 census data on Thursday, but the California is going to do some adjustments to that data. We're going to move the state prison population back to their last known home addresses. And state law states that that will become the official California redistricting database. And then the Ed code says that we'll use the data validated, which Department of Finance says will be that data. So we'll be getting that data in mid to late September. It'll take some time, obviously, to incorporate that into the database and make any proposed plan revisions that are needed. But as was mentioned earlier, we would have until March 1st to complete that process.
Thank you.
And just to reiterate what Dr. Johnson said, the Ed code, specifically 1519.5, does provide that the populations used shall be, or excuse me, figures as validated by the public research unit of the Department of Finance. So that's where Doug is, that's what he's referencing as it relates to the validated portion of that data.
So I guess the one thing I clarify for the public listening who may be having their head spin by references to different bureaucracies, the key thing is that the lines will be updated as all school districts must far in advance of the 2022 election. They will be equal population for the next election.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other quick clarifying questions by the board? No? Okay, why don't we go to public comment? Diane, would you mind opening public comment for us, please?
Yes, to our attendees, if you would like to make public comment, please use the raise your hand functionality at the bottom of your screen at this time. You have 3 minutes to address the board. We will start with Rosie Rivera and then go to Scott Rafferty. Rosie, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening. So I just have a couple of questions. I guess one, just to be clear, the census data is going to be incorporated before final maps are drawn? Because otherwise I don't understand what the rush was, knowing that we had census data coming out, why we weren't waiting to receive that data to draw out this process. So that's my first question. And then the second question is, in terms of these interactive maps, could there be more information on these legends? Because just looking at it, like, I was trying to follow along before Dr. Johnson gave his presentation, and, I pulled up the legend, and it was I appreciate that, the 5 versus the 7, but just looking at the legend, there's no indication as to what the most recent map is. So maybe if just in parentheses, you could say sort of, that 702 is most recent using 7 members and et cetera, for parents just looking at it, maybe for the first time. And lastly, could there be also more information in terms of what types of numbers are we looking at within each of these, sections? If that could be added to the legend, how many students or families are represented in each of those, because otherwise we have no idea, no way of knowing, what the equity is based on. And not that I don't trust our board, but I'd like to know for myself, what are the numbers within those areas?
Thank you, Rosie. We have Scott Rafferty and then Randy. Scott, please go ahead.
Okay, let's just be clear. These are maps to nowhere. They are maps that will never be used. They are a subterfuge to exhaust the authority of the county committee to supervise your transition to a lawful election system. And that is fundamentally wrong. From a Brown Act perspective, this is a virtual meeting, and during a virtual meeting, access to papers given to a majority of the board is supposed to be available to the public, i.e. posted. Neither the presentation given by your general counsel or my documentation sent to you earlier today is available to the public. But here's what it says. The state demographer validated the data last week. That's what he says. Now, Dr. Johnson may tell you what the law is. He may say what the state demographer says is going to happen, but that's in writing. So this notion that you won the race, that you got your map finished or will get your map finished before this date in September is an illusion. It's a misrepresentation. The state law is incredibly clear. The felon relocation adjustment applies exclusively to cities and counties. And the written document from the state demographer sent to you today confirms that you have all the data you need. Now, unfortunately, that data includes, to a greater extent than anticipated, a very smaller than expected increase in Shoreview. That was not what I was anticipating, but it has very negative implications for a Latino, for a strong Latino trustee area. And they need to be confronted. They need to be confronted in a public hearing when people have an opportunity to speak to them. It's 203 is imaginary, and you should put my document up there because it's a lot easier to follow than Dr. Johnson's. There's a lot of data errors and inconsistencies. Several maps say there are no Asian Americans anywhere in the district. It's a very sloppy, confusing, and erroneous set of documents. I try to set that straight, but the fact remains that map 203 has 3 of you in one district paired and 2 of you paired in another district. That's never going to happen. It's an illusion. You're going to try to cram this through the county committee with the support apparently of your county council, which is really tragic for San Mateo County. And then you're going to come back in the dead of night when nobody's watching and cram through something totally different that is good for you, but bad for the county for the next decade. And, you know, I call that out. That's wrong. So you're not listening to the public. You're shutting down public comment. You're not complying with the Brown Act. So really do a better job. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Randy, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. So one comment that I wanted to make, so I appreciate the improvements that were made through the 5 trustee areas via draft 204 and 205. One thing, however, that I was disappointed in is that there was one modification that I think it was Trustee Corzo that was suggested, which was combining North Shoreview with North Central and figuring out a configuration, because that seems like a configuration that with the populations and with folks that know those neighborhoods is a configuration that makes a lot of sense. Yet there was nothing that was presented that included that. And so, you know, I don't know how that would shift some of these other boundaries. That one makes a lot of sense to me. And then finally, between 204 and 205, I think 205 makes more sense with just having more of that map being associated with that which is south of 92. And I think the more that you could like push to south of 92, the better. That's a very strong and natural dividing line. And then finally with, I just have to say that I'm disappointed with just the lack of political will or consideration for 7 district members. As I've said, this isn't insurmountable, and there's a lot of inconsistency with what I've heard from board members. There are ways that you could get around the length of the meetings. A lot of them would just be coming to the meetings prepared with your reports, with your statements, with your questions, being a lot more succinct, decentering yourselves and focusing on the students. There are a lot of things that could be done to make things run more efficiently in terms of the meetings and as a governance team. And I would just really encourage you to focus on that. The community has been begging you to, quote, do your jobs. And this is the sort of thing that they're asking. They're asking for legitimate representation. You're not here to micromanage a district. You are here to represent the public in the public schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. We will go ahead with Joy Shmuley. I apologize if I mispronounce your name. Please go ahead.
Good evening. It's been butchered worse, don't worry. First of all, welcome to our superintendent. I just want to say welcome aboard. But as opposed to some other views, I just want to say, looking at the 700 series, we'll call them, of maps, I do think those represent Foster City better. In the other ones, I felt like there were strips of Foster City that were handed off to, I think it was, a different area based on size. However, I do like, and I haven't had a lot of time to look at 702. I didn't realize there were some others added. I did like, but I did, from what I have seen very quickly, 701, 702, because I feel like there is more representation for Foster City rather than a chunk of it here and then a strip of it there. I like that it was split divided. I feel like if it's divided in half, as well as combined with other districts or other areas, that is a more fair representation than 80% of Foster City or 90% of Foster City even. And then anything along the Port Royal, along the levee was passed off to a different, or not passed off, I don't mean it that way, but was split with another district or another area. So I want to say thank you. I do think that those, I would really push for those as Foster City residents so that we can have better representation. And it would be great. There's possibly two. It could be people from San Mateo, it could be from the other areas. That's great. But at least that would have more representation for Foster City as well as the other areas that they encompass. I did notice on 701 as well that there are no Asians represented in Foster City in that one. And I know that to be not true, or across the district. And I know that to not be true. So I think that 701 should probably be, the demographic one should be updated. But thank you for your work on this. I do not envy you.
Thank you. We'll go ahead with Andrew Prock. Andrew, please go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, I want to thank you guys for drawing these maps. I love maps. They're great maps to look at. I've spent probably way too much time looking at them. I find them to be very interesting, mostly from the perspective of just what is missing from the maps. I think I want to highlight what Noelia said in the last couple of meetings, where the original set of maps didn't have any consideration for the community of North Central at all. And I'm seeing that still in the new maps. I'm hoping we can throw away the original set of maps as soon as possible, because they all look like they're ignoring demographics entirely. And I think that it's a real problem with the maps, that all of the maps still in general, like even in 50 or 205, I see Sunny Bray is pulled into North Central, as opposed to like North Shoreview, which is much more demographically aligned. I think that there's not a real clear understanding of the difference between demographics and traffic boundaries. And so I think like there's a lot of just odd choices here that are they were done because they lined up with roads and not with demographics. Like someone in the last meeting mentioned using Edgewater as a boundary as opposed to the Foster City Lagoon. Foster City Lagoon is a lot more difficult to get over than Edgewater, for example. And using one versus the other for boundary seems like not a lot of actual demographic consideration into these maps. I don't have a strong feeling about 5 or 7. I don't think it's going to be easy to cut up no matter what you do, but it would be really nice if actual demographics or someone who knew the demographics of the city was involved in building these maps. Another good example is the railroad tracks south of 9th are a much, much larger barrier for demographic cross-pollination than they are north of 9th. And so using the El Camino as the boundary puts these weird little communities like by the Taco Bell in with Bay Meadows, which aren't really joint communities. You know, George Hall and Bay Meadows go together really well. Like the Taco Bell and the oil change apartments don't really go there. So I'm hoping that we can get some maps that actually look at the underlying demographics and integrate those in a way that we have coherent communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. President Chin, we have no additional hands at this time.
Sorry, thank you. I'm just making notes, my own notes here. Okay, great. Thank you everyone for providing your comments. Does anyone else, or would anyone else like to provide any comments before we close public comment period on this item? Please raise your hand now, or we will go ahead and close public comment.
There are no additional hands, President Chin.
Great, thank you, Diane. I will close public comment for this item. And before we go to our board discussion on these items, I am doing this just like I did the last meeting last Thursday. I just want to let everyone know how many people are on the call as we try and figure out how to display that technologically wise. Anyways, there's about 37 participants on our call. I will say, just as a recap in public participation, in the first 2 meetings that we had prior to the maps being drawn, I believe there were at the first meeting 6 participants and the next one was 4. At our first meeting after the maps were drawn, which was held on August 6th, there were, I think, 43, somewhere in between 40 and 45 is what I recall, number of participants. And tonight now we're at 37. So I just want to put that out there for everyone to know who's listening and how many people are listening. Before we go to board comments, there were a number of questions or comments that I was going to return to staff to see if either staff, consultant, or county council wanted to make any comments before the board discusses.
Sure. President Chin, if I might, there was one set of questions. Ms. Rivera asked about wanting more demographics on the numbers than are shown in the interactive map. And it is true that interactive map is great at seeing the areas, but it's not good at showing the demographics. For those, though, I would flag that on the district website, there is a PDF listing with very extensive demographics on the citizen voting age percentages, renters versus homeowners, languages spoken at home, and all those very detailed demographic breakdowns for each trustee area in each of the maps. So it is it's unfortunate we can't integrate that into the integrated viewer or into the interactive viewer to have those more easily available, but they are there on the district website for those who want to see those numbers.
And just to plug in a little further on that, there was public comment a couple of minutes ago regarding lack of Asian population. The demographic maps are updated, and it does include the demographic for the Asian populations. Those maps are available online at the district's dedicated website and as part of the agenda packet for tonight's meeting.
Yeah, I was going to flag the Asian percentage of citizen voting age population and all the other percentages of citizen voting age have always been down there incorrect. In the original maps, I used an old template that was pulling the Asian percentage of total population, and that had an error in it. It was showing the wrong numbers, but that section was never intended to be there. Anyways, the key numbers for Voting Rights Act compliance and analysis and likely voters are those citizen voting age population numbers, which have always been there.
Great, thank you. So I suppose before we get to not public comment, before we get to board discussion, and I know that we have now 3 new maps to discuss, and we can go through and provide comments on those. Per staff's presentation, our schedule is to go through these maps, provide comments, obviously listen to the public, provide and to their comments, give our comments back to the consultant and county council, and then to maintain our schedule, we are scheduled to have a meeting on August 26th, which is our regularly scheduled board meetings to actually vote on the chosen map. And just for clarification, Doug, or Dr. Johnson, you had mentioned that Trustee Corzo had asked the question about the 2020 census. So it has been released now. Our problem was always just sort of the timing of our 90-day window when we didn't know exactly when the 2020 census was going to be released, but it has been released now. And so per your statement, even if we approve a map on August 26th, no matter what, it will be updated by time the actual deadline is, which is March 1st of next year. Is that correct?
Yes, and it'll be updated using the official California redistricting database, which will come out in September.
Okay. So we're in sort of this sort of timeline crunch. So we have a 90-day safe harbor period, which really means that we have 90 days to take an action, otherwise be subject to potential litigation. I won't say that it is a threat to litigation, but potential litigation. So we have 90 days under this safe harbor period to take action and to move our maps over to the county committee. And this is all done under the guise of previously we had requested an extension from our attorney, Scott Rafferty, who has submitted the demand letter. But from my understanding, that extension to the 90-day window has been denied. So I know Mr. Rafferty is still on the call. I would put it out to him and just publicly ask, we would love to go ahead and incorporate everything in terms of your comments and the complete 2020 census before we adopt a map, but we would love an extension if you were to grant it. I know that you had previously denied our request, but I'll put it out there. And if you would like to grant us our request, please contact our county council with that in writing. So we do have a little bit of scheduling issues, but if we maintain our schedule and make comments on these maps, then we will get to the August 26th date with or without an extension. So does anybody have any further questions before we get into anything related to the maps? No. Okay. Does anybody want to make any comments on the 3 new maps? Or last time, actually, we started with the 7-member maps, 7 area maps versus the 5. Does anyone want to make any comments on that? Feel free. This is our time to discuss and provide comments, but hopefully come to some sort of, not agreement, but maybe a little bit of a consensus to see which direction we're going as to 5 and 7, and then also to the maps to hopefully narrow them down for the August 26th meeting. So, Trustee Corzo.
Yeah, I'm unmuting, but I would actually really love to hear Trustee Watkins' thoughts, because we didn't get that chance last time around. And then, yeah, we can move forward. I'm sorry, Trustee Watkins, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, put her on the spot.
Interested.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Corzo. And thank you for the updates here, and apologies if there are things that I say or ask that maybe you guys already kind of covered. I guess for me, I have one question that maybe Superintendent Ochoa, or I don't, you could share a little bit more with me. I'm curious to know, I mean, I know that what the schedule looked like and in terms of public hearings and that sort of outreach, but I'm just curious, and you know, Trustee Chin, you just shared a little bit about attendance at the meetings, but I am curious to know what the general, both in terms of what communication, if there's any other communication that's happened or any other feedback that's been collected from the public, and just in general, what the numbers have been in terms of any other sessions, attendance, surveys, like anything else that's happened, because yeah, so that would be helpful if there's any other context there that you could provide.
So Trustee Watkins, to date, we've held our pre-map public hearings, and this is our second hearing on the post drafting of the maps. We've also, since the initiation of the process, had links to a district site for the trustee area elections with a Google form that is linked to that website. The district has received 7 written submissions from those public members that have chosen to go in and complete that that information. Earlier this week and late last week, the district sent out notification to all of the families using our district email communication system, encouraging them to participate in this process, to attend tonight's meeting, to give public comment, using some very accessible visual related content. And then today at each one of our middle schools, we posted publicly large printout poster boards on easels at each of our 4 middle schools, Bayside, Burrell, Bowditch, and Abbott, notifying anybody who drove up to the school and who passed through that flow of traffic about tonight's event, about their opportunity to give public comment, and with a summary of the process. So those have been the primary ways that we've engaged, aside from the required pre-draft, pre-map hearings and post-map hearings.
Okay, thanks for sharing a little bit about that. And I mean, it sounds like we've you know, taken increased steps to get public feedback, or to get public input and feedback. I guess for me, when I think about this as being like a public driven process, and I think about the numbers of, you know, responses and, you know, attendees, I just have kind of concerns around that. And I feel like, you know, to some of the public comments around some of the demographic pieces, just still feeling like a little bit sticky in terms of some of the maps. I think having additional, you know, public input around that would be, is going to be, you know, is important. And I know that that conflicts with our timing and our ability, like our need to potentially make a decision, and not for me feeling like, maybe not having as much public input as I would like to have in a decision. Just wondering how much, you know, this is a huge decision, and it's going to widely impact what our, you know, board of trustees looks like moving forward potentially. And, you know, it's really important in the same way that I think that we've just thought about, it's really important for this to be as right as we possibly can. And I think a big part of that is public input. So I think that's a big thing that I'm kind of left with this is thinking about how we can do that. And I think if we are able to incorporate new census data, I would like for us to think about if we're able to, you know, have the extension as Trustee Chin just, you know, publicly requested again. I think that might be an opportunity for us to think about if there are additional ways that we can highlight how important of a decision this is and how much we want public input, and see if there are other ways that we can get that. That being said, in terms of like logistics on the maps, I mean, I think, yeah, I'm curious to hear kind of where everyone else is in terms of the new maps. It sounds like there was a lot of feedback that was taken into consideration from the last meeting, and thinking about North Central. I do think that, yeah, so I'm curious to hear what other trustees think about the new ones, I guess, but that was my initial thoughts.
Thank you, Trustee Watkins. Does anyone want to provide any further comments on the maps as we move? This is our, again, this is our time for discussion.
Oh, one other thing, sorry. Just to really quickly chime in as you were saying that. Another thing I was thinking about in terms of the public comment piece around, it sounds like there was discussion around like the 7 versus 5. I'm just curious, you know, I think that could be an interesting kind of, I guess, I don't know if poll is the right word, or, you know, I wonder just in general where the public stands on that. And I'm also curious to know where folks stand on that here. And I'm also curious, I guess, to have a little bit more like data around other districts and like at what size do districts typically transit, like what size district means X, what size district, like what does that look like both in our county and just across the state. So I don't know, I feel like I would need a little bit more information, both public comment wise or just like public input, I don't mean public comment because we're only, you know, the public comment that we get is obviously really important, but it's a small subset of our general population. So I would love to know more about what people think about that and to have a little bit more data around that before actually making a decision about what that would look like.
Trustee Watkins, if I may, and I'd love to invite Dr. Johnson back to this little portion of it. Dr. Johnson gave a little bit of insight on his experience working with hundreds of school districts on those that go from 5 to 7 or that are 7. So Dr. Johnson, would you mind recapping that same portion you discussed last week?
Sure, happy to. Obviously, there are the giant districts, the San Francisco's, the San Jose's, the LA's that are big. Outside of that, all of the 7 district or 7 area or 7 board member boards we run into have all been unified school districts that went to 7 as part of unification. So I'm actually not aware of any school district that decided it was so big that it now needed a 5-member board, other than San Francisco, LA, those giant ones. All the others are, you know, when the different elementary school districts decided to unify, one was so small that they feared they wouldn't have a voice with the 5-member board, so they wanted a 7-member board, and then they just had 7 forever. And we worked, LA County Office of Ed did a little bit of research on this too and found the same thing. So it hasn't been driven by size as much as just that unification shift. Just about everybody else is 5.
All right, yeah, that's my kind of understanding generally. So I just wanted to make sure I was correct on that. So that's helpful, thanks.
Sure, I can go. So to that point about the 5 versus 7, I did talk a lot about this last week, but I'll just share again that I feel very strongly that 7 is not the right direction for a school district. I want to highlight that our county has 5 district supervisors, and I think the number is around like 165,000 people in each district. Our district is much smaller than that. I think the number is, oh, let me look at I want to say it's like 27, 26. Am I like way off? Let me look.
You're exactly right.
Yeah. And I think like the potential benefits of going to 7 do not outweigh the possible negative impacts. When I think about the local districts that have 7, specifically for me, like San Francisco and Oakland come up. And while those are very, very diverse communities, there's a recall going on right now in San Francisco, and there's a lot of division in districts that are close by and have more than 5 trustees. I also think that when we think about the intent of the civil rights, the California Voting Rights Act, the intent is to increase the chances of having more diverse trustees and elected officials. And if we were to move to 7, then those chances are diluted. If you look at the maps, to me, that district. And part of what I'm really proud of the work that we've been doing is to create a united school district. And I think we've been making really good progress on that with 5 trustees. And I also think that it could create it's not about having longer meetings. It's about, again, the concern about creating more division. And then back to the intent, right, of the Voting Rights Act, it's the intent is to increase the political power for historically excluded communities. And I live in Foster City. I love Foster City. I love San Mateo. But Foster City has really, really strong schools, and all of our schools are strong. But I don't see Foster City as like a historically excluded community. And I think that when we look at our school district, and just like the way the population numbers differ between the 2 cities, there's definitely more rationale around having, Foster City have 1 trustee area versus like 4 more so in San Mateo. And I mean, the maps that the 2 most recent versions of the 5 area maps do have some of Foster City in an area with San Mateo. And so that, that's one person could easily walk, that area, and there's still a chance there, right? So again, when I think about our community and the communities that have been more historically excluded from access to political power and representation on this board, I think about North Central, I think about Shoreview, North Shoreview, Los Prados areas. And if we were to move to a 7 area map, those voices get diluted. And so that's how I feel about it, but I'd love to kind of hear other people's thoughts. And maybe it would be kind of more efficient if we agree or disagree on that and get that clear, and then continue to discuss the other maps.
I'll just chime in on my comment. So just like strictly looking at the 7-member maps, I like 702 better than 701. But so my initial thoughts on 7 was like, okay, more representation, more people involved is great. But I don't think it's necessarily better if it's at the expense of missing out on people that have been excluded in the past. And so just similar to last meeting, I like the idea of 7, but at the same time, I understand what the goal is here, and need to keep focused on that. So not a direct answer, but those are my thoughts.
I'll chime in too, just so Trustee Watkins, so you have the full picture. I know, and I'll just summarize what Trustee Warren had mentioned last time, is that there was a discussion whether to continue on with 7 maps for this meeting. And there was sort of a split consensus about doing it. So we made sure that we did modify and include a 7-member map here in this meeting. I think Trustee Warren was open to the idea without putting words in her mouth. She was open to the idea, but wanted some more options and more research done sort of on it. Me personally, as I was thinking about this before, I was sort of open to the idea of looking at other options and seeing what another 7-member map would look like. But after thinking about it after last meeting and during this whole past week, I'm kind of leaning against doing a 7-member map. I do think that there are consequences, even though it does open up the possibility of having 2 additional trustees. I fear that, when you look historically at our board and you talk to previous board members, there was a lot of division. There were people who were outliers. There was the meetings were sort of rough. Trustees would get up and leave during meetings. They would just not show up. And I fear that actually moving to a 7-member meeting, we get in some ways maybe more divided than aligned. And so I figure, not figure, but I'm still sort of open to it, but I'm leaning towards keeping the 5-member trustees. And I did broach the subject last time, is that we're under a 90-day sort of, again, safe harbor to approve a map. That map, theoretically could have 5 or 7. I think if we move to a 7-member, or, if we approve a 5-member trustee area map, we can always move to a 7-member area at a later time. The most important thing at the moment is making sure we stay within our timelines, unless we get an extension, and make sure that we approve a map within the timeline. So I broached and threw out the topic that said, hey, or the option of let's move forward with 5. And then if we want to do more research, see what's happening in other jurisdictions, find out, look into the history, look at our elections, our previous elections, see how many people, actually, campaigned. I think we can do that at a later date. So at this moment, I'm saying I would lean towards staying with 5.
I just don't see us like down the road going to 7 if we don't do it now, which is fine if we don't do it now. But I'm just thinking that there's maybe been opportunities in the past to switch to 7 and it hasn't happened. And then this process seems complicated enough. So I don't know how likely it would be that we move to 7 at some point, but I'm fine with making a decision and going one direction or the other.
Yeah, just my comment is it may not be actually us. I mean, the thought would be is like, what would happen in 2022 when there are 2 open spots or something, and let's say nobody runs, or maybe a ton of people run. I think, you have to look sort of at the history of us moving first into trustee area elections and then seeing what would happen from there. That would be sort of my comment. Not saying that it would be us going ahead and doing it. I mean, we could do it, but that would be my thought as you collect data and move along and into area elections. I'd say regardless about the 5 or 7, we just need to provide direction to the consultant and staff on which way we're going with the maps. So why don't I start? Last time I sort of outlined my thought process. One was North Central. When again, you look at the CBRA, you look at historically underrepresented communities, I think North Central definitely needs to have its own sort of trustee area. So thank you, Doug and staff and county council, and for modifying those maps. I do like the maps and the lines at North Central trustee area 4 as it's laid out on both the revised 204 and 205. My second point was about Foster City and making sure there was Foster City representation. And then my third was about, and I talked about this sort of island effect, making sure that no trustee was sort of out on their own island, only looking at their constituents. And after thinking about this a lot and going back through the maps, one thing that I thought about is that my maybe number 2 thought process or my second point and my third point was sort of contrary or conflicting in that, if you had a Foster City only area, that Foster City only area could only be, Foster City. And so I was a little concerned about that. So my thought as I looked at the revised maps, I do like the options of, what is it? 204 a little bit because it does divide up Foster City a little bit more. I did make the comment to look at the land uses. So thank you for making that change along Hillsdale. I think when you look at 204, and if you look north of East Hillsdale, that starts to include in the other in trustee area 2, sort of the higher density areas of Foster City. So you look at the Metro Center, you look at the new Pilgrim Plaza that's being developed, and then there's some further high density residential units or buildings complexes farther along East Hillsdale as you move towards San Mateo. I do think though, when you look at 204, that number one, trustee area is Foster City alone. And so or all by itself. And that kind of doesn't sit well with me because I think that area that new trustee could only look at Foster City. I did hear what the public commenter said about sort of trusting the future candidates or future trustees. I definitely would like to trust everybody, and you know how optimistic I am. But there's a way of actually saying, well, do you actually draw the lines to hope and trust that a future candidate will be mindful that we are one district, or do we make modifications to the lines now to ensure that that all trustee areas incorporate a number of schools and different enrollment areas? So to me, I like map 202. I like the west side of map 205, which when you look at it, it has, you know, the north central, which is in trustee area 1, trustee area 3. I do like, but I will agree with the public commenter about the boundary south of 92. Instead of El Camino being the boundary that separates trustee area 3 and trustee area 5, the railroad tracks seem to make more sense in that area. And that would also balance out a little bit more of the socioeconomics of trustee 3, area 3. I also like how trustee 5, area 5 goes all the way from 101 all the way up to the hills. So when you look at those three trustee areas, you can see that each area has a balance where there are different schools that everyone would have to think about. Not only the elementary schools as the feeder schools to the middle schools, but they'd also have to think about the middle schools. The one conflict or issue that I have with map 205 is the east side of 101. To me, again, you know, area 1 sort of is only Foster City, and I think that it's not really, I would say, balanced per se. I actually liked the division even though I sort of lean against 7 members. I liked the division of the map 702 of Foster City a little bit, where trustee area 2 incorporated the areas of Los Prados. And so therefore it got a little bit of San Mateo. I would rather actually see that area in map 205 stretch not only, so area 1 in 205, not only to include the Los Prados area, but maybe also the Lakeshore Park area. And that would help balance out the Foster City or the trustee area 1. So those are my thoughts. I do thank you for listening to our comments. I do thank the public for providing their comments as well. But generally, those are my thoughts at the moment.
I'd like to just jump in real quick and ask Dr. Johnson if he received sufficient feedback on any further adjustments, or if the board is going to want Dr. Johnson to conduct any further adjustments.
Sure, I'll just, drawing from what I've heard so far and certainly open to any other thoughts you might have, is to take a map that puts, as I discussed earlier, being fairly straightforward, using the east side of map 204 with the west side of 205, but over on the west side, shift that boundary so it follows south of Highway 92, so it follows a railroad instead of El Camino Real. And then east of 101, looking at, can area 1 be brought out to pick up Los Prados? and possibly, if possible, Lakeshore Park, depending on how much that rotation impacts the Foster City border of areas 1 and 2. Sound like I captured that pretty well there, President Chin?
Yeah, of course, we're gonna hopefully hear from the rest of the trustees, but yes, I do like the map 205, especially the west side of 101. But the east side, I would, modify, yes, area number 1 to include Los Prados and Lakeshore Park, which is really, I'm just calling it Lakeshore Park, but it would go up the full neighborhood of Lakeshore, obviously. And of course, the numbers all have to make sense. And so that's my thoughts on that. But I'd love to hear what any other trustees here want to comment or say.
I have comments, but I'm waiting for our other trustees to kind of, I want to give you guys more space, or you ladies more space, to kind of dig a little deep into it. I can just go if you want. Is that okay? So I actually, I like the idea of kind of Ken's point, and I wanted to actually say something because, I always appreciate all of our public comments. It's ready. It's necessary, right? It's part of the process. But I also just kind of want to say that I know 100% that our board's deliberation and thought and intention behind our thinking on these maps, that like we're not trying to support ghost maps, or you know what I mean, like that's just untrue. And these are difficult decisions that we're all making, knowing very well that we will not have these seats forever, right? This is about making a decision that we know will impact our community for decades to come. But that's not to say that, the future boards can't adjust if that's necessary and what's best for the community. So I just wanted to kind of have that as a foundation for my next comments. Yeah, so I agree with seeing that different version that Trustee Chin and Dr. Johnson kind of discussed a bit. Yeah, I think, again, I'm not sure if we're super clear yet on whether we want to do the 7 versus 5. If we're going to vote on that, I'm voting 5. But I've been super clear. So I guess I'm just saying I'm not super clear on where everyone else is on that, and that'd be helpful. But I think the version that I feel most comfortable with is the one that Trustee Chin and Dr. Johnson discussed a bit ago. I also want to share kind of some of my thinking that I shared last week around some of the previous versions of the maps, just because I know that we have folks on this call, on this Zoom, that weren't on the one last week. So just if you look at like version 201, 202, and 203, all of them essentially either paired up North Shoreview, North Central, and San Mateo Park. And that to me was very problematic because there's a lot of affluence in San Mateo Park, and those communities are very different, and you can feel that difference as you walk across El Camino. I did say that North Central and North Shoreview neighborhoods and communities feel much more similar to each other. But I actually think that's part of why they should be separate, because separating those two out and including North Shoreview with Shoreview and kind of like Los Prados areas, I'm not, like I said, I'm not totally wedded to that part, but like separating those two communities actually in my experience with campaigning and with those communities, right? Like having grown up in that community and being very much having a lot of history, living and having friends live in those two communities. It would be, in my opinion, you know, if I'm talking about a candidate that is wanting to campaign and door knock and contact voters in those two areas, walking North Central and Central is totally doable and much more accessible. And then walking North Shoreview and Shoreview area is again doable and accessible. And there's like a lot of, I think, kind of natural alignment in those neighborhoods in that way. So that's kind of how I thought about it. I also wanted to, this kind of reminds me, there was a public comment earlier, and I think it's important to note that, you know, we just made it through a pandemic, and I was actually really surprised that, you know, the recent election that we had in 2020, which was Trustee Watkins, mine, and Trustee Warren's current seats, that it was an uncontested race, essentially, right? We had way more community engagement and engagement from families and parents than like in the history of our board. I feel pretty confident in being able to say that, right? Like ever. We had like hundreds of people on our meetings. But I actually think that, you know, that is part of why we didn't see a contested race, because those were really difficult conversations. Being an elected trustee during a pandemic is not, and we heard this repeated to us in night after night of board meetings, is not something that people envied. These are difficult decisions that need to be made, and that's just part of the reality, I think, of the history and maybe some of the context about how kind of that happened. Yeah, I know I personally definitely encouraged folks to run, to throw their hat in the race, and but it was a really difficult time for a lot of people in our community, and so I you know, you got to respect people's choices. So I'm gonna stop there. I definitely would love to hear more from our other trustees, and happy to like continue discussing it, because I'm kind of concerned, like I don't want it to just be like we talk, everyone gets their one chance, and then we like make a decision. I want us to kind of have like a back and forth dialogue, because this is super important.
If I may jump in real quick, Trustee Corzo, I just want to clarify that the board will not be taking action on a 5 versus 7. It's only direction on what to focus on for the demographer moving forward. So there won't be any official action.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah, I was actually just gonna say, is it possible that we say like which 700 series map we like, which 500, and alter like from there, so that when we get to the next meeting where we have to make a decision, we have something to decide about? Or it sounds like we don't have to cut one out now, but just more like direction.
My feeling, and Dr. Johnson and Rosendo, if you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like what we're doing is at each meeting, we'll just keep adding more and more maps. There are revisions off of the maps that were originally presented, but when the time comes to actually vote, we will then have, you know, lots of options, including both the 500 series and the 700 series maps. Is that correct?
Yes, all the maps stay on the table, and they're going to still live in your dedicated website. They're still going to be interactive. They're still going to be there. But the direction is where you want Dr. Johnson to focus if on any changes that need to be done prior to the next hearing. So that's correct, President Chen.
Trustee Barchi, do you want to go ahead or?
Yeah, my kids are just being really loud right now, so I'll just talk really fast. So Okay, I'll stop talking about 700 because I like 702. So I'm gonna, and I know that there's that's staying on the table. But in terms of the 500, the 200 series maps, I did like what Trustee Chin outlined about kind of using, I think, kind of like the map 204 sort of for the east side and the 205 for the west side. I would like to see maybe one more version of this, of the, like kind of combining those with the comments that he made. I think that makes some sense. So I like that.
I can jump in. I know that everything's staying on the table for now, but I do echo. I'm not in support of us moving to 7 trustee area. For, I guess I don't need to reiterate, but for many of the reasons that were already shared, I don't think it makes sense for, and just based on kind of the size of our district, and I think there's a reason why other districts, you know, our size are at 5, and I think it makes sense just given the size of our district and the way that these are drawn, and for all of the reasons that were already mentioned in terms of some of the downsides. So it sounds like that might still be on the table, but just wanted to share my thinking on that. So I agree with Trustee Chin, I guess, with all of the trustees so far in terms of which map to kind of hone in on. And like the suggested changes or, you know, things to consider that were shared at the beginning by you, Trustee Chin. So I think that map, our 205, to me seems like kind of the strongest version in terms of where we are so far, and I'm interested to see kind of what, with the adjustments, what that will look like, and to be able to continue then the conversation from there. So I think that's where I am so far.
Just to facilitate the back and forth, I will correct myself and say, yes, it wasn't the 500 series, it was the 200 series. So thank you, Trustee Carter, for mentioning that. And going off on the idea is when I also think about just like Foster City in general, Foster City in terms of, even though population wise, they're smaller than the city, we also have to think about the enrollment population of our district, and Foster City itself represents about 25 to 30% of our student population. And so my thoughts on where you move the line and including more of Los Prados and Lakeshore into Area 1 would not only give Trustee Area 1 more insight and more, I guess, depth or diversity, and when you think about we're one district, but also for Trustee Area, would be 2, the idea that there would be more Foster City numbers. So instead of just having a sliver of Foster City where there would probably be no chance of an additional Foster City candidate, if, let's just say, we move the line to incorporate Trustee Area 1 to incorporate more of San Mateo, that means Trustee Area 2 has to incorporate more of Foster City, which then means that it is possible that Trustee Area 2 and 1 could flip-flop in terms of having Foster City representation. Or we could actually have 2 Foster City representations on the board. And I think that over time would be really good for the board as we move forward. So that's sort of my thinking on that as you play with that sort of the east side of 101. But Trustee Proctor had mentioned, maybe we talk about the 7 series, as we'll call it. I do have comments just on 702. I also do like 702, but I'll make my comments. One in Trustee Area 2, I'll start with that, going south to north. Again, I like how Trustee Area 2 incorporates Los Prados, but I would rather see that also include Lakeshore, the Lakeshore neighborhood, going all the way up to Highway 92. Then because of that, Trustee Area number 1 would have to be modified. And I would love for Trustee Area number 1 to start incorporating the area all the way to the water, which then goes past Target and incorporates Harbortown. Harbortown has historically shared in some ways a lot of what the what Foster City shares in terms of their, not only their demographics, but their sort of apartment or townhouse style. And there have always been questions about Harbor Town children not being able to go to Foster City Elementary. And so I feel like that would be good if Area 1 were to be incorporated all the way to the lagoon. So therefore that would help with the balance of San Mateo and Foster City in Area 1. And then lastly, in Area 3, when we look at North Shoreview and Shoreview neighborhoods, there's that one section that juts out across El Camino, across 101. I would move that down a little bit, for that line down a little further to incorporate, because again, you're taking from Area 2 is taking care from Area 1. Area 1 is then taking some space from Area 3. So I would incorporate in Area 6, maybe move that sort of box line down to include the Sunnybury neighborhood, would be my comments. And theoretically, Area 6, because of the new census data, that incorporates the Bay Meadows neighborhood, and therefore we would see further growth in the new numbers, and that would probably balance things out. So I do like 702 better. I do think that there could be modifications, and those are my suggestions that I would look at.
Yeah, President Chair, if I could, the only thing on that is, in this case, we haven't quite completed the rotation because you've got trustee Area 2 picking up the lake shore, but not giving anything up.
Thank you. Well, maybe, yeah, thank you. So then obviously that would have to be whatever works numbers wise. So yes.
Yeah, so, but that's gonna make it really hard to take 1 into 3, because 1's gonna have to pick really whatever 1 gives up to 2, 2's got to give back kind of thing. So they kind of stay locked in, unfortunately. It's gonna take it hard to get 1 up into Harbor Town. Unless 3 comes down in the Foster City as well, which
yeah, I hear you. I trust that you guys would work out the numbers and make some sort of work. I guess my suggestion is maybe to look at the boundary on Shell Boulevard and maybe bring that farther south to incorporate some of the high density housing that's there. So shift that line maybe. But I'm either that or shift the northern line. The eastern line by, what is that, Compass Lane? Maybe.
Yeah, I can definitely trade between 1 and 2, no problem. The challenge is I can't get 1 then to go north, unless 3 also comes south into Foster City.
I see.
Yeah. But I can certainly do the 1 and 2 shifts.
Okay, thank you. Those are my comments.
I was thinking about the way that our school boundaries are drawn, and how it'd be really interesting to see a map layer that shows that. I actually think that's something that we need to make available as a school district to our community, and something that hasn't been available. I know there was like a community drawn version of that map, but I'm sure it potentially has changed, or we need one. And it'd be really interesting to see that as a map layer here.
I'll just agree with Trustee Corzo. A lot of the times I look at the maps and I know where the boundaries are, but I don't think the public really knows for this context. And so while I say that, people in North Central will have, there'll be a breadth of diversity in terms of school population and where everyone goes, you don't actually see it unless you look at the maps. So enrollment map.
Yeah, the one thing I would flag on that is, because we do have a PDF map, but they were set so long ago that the district was very good at putting us in touch with the consulting firm that had drawn that. And they came back and said it's so old that they actually don't have GIS files of it. GIS being the mapping software. And the challenge is that they're so small that they don't follow block lines. And so it would be a little confusing as we try to overlap it with the census blocks that drive all this process. But I can try to come close, but it would have to, we'd have to manually generate it.
I think like if it's not possible to have it like in the integrated, that's okay. But I guess like the bigger ask is that like we make that available to, and that's not on you. I think that's on our district, right? Like that is something that folks have that as we're talking about mapping all of these different things is just kind of a natural question for I think some folks in our community, and something that us as a board have to discuss also.
Sure. Actually, that would be actually easy to do. Is there is a map on the district website. You can just add that link onto the districting page, so it's an easy, quick reference from this project's page over to that map. I believe that would be too hard to do.
So we already have that on our district website.
Yeah. I'm looking at it right now.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Doug and Superintendent Ochoa, but that's something that the district's own attendance demographer manages.
Yeah, under the school district, under About Us districts map, there's a map there. That's where I found it. But yeah, we can certainly coordinate with the district staff to make sure it's easily available and people know about it.
So I guess looking at this map, what's not, oh, okay, I see. See, but it doesn't actually show, it kind of groups like, oh, all of the elementary schools serve the North Central, like all of these elementary schools serve the North Central San Mateo area, which is true, but also, I mean, I think there's an opportunity there to to actually be specific and show. So yeah, let's do that. But I think for like our district, to actually show like where all of those, like how that green block of North Central is divided and bused essentially to other schools. Sorry, this is kind of like a tangent, but also really important as we think about like just again maps in our community and how our schools are implicated in that.
Great. Any other, I would agree with Trustee Corzo, just on that, the North Central, just that little blurb. Obviously, this map was made a long time ago. The enrollment maps that I've seen carves up North Central in 4 to 6 blocks where, the schools where it's basically carved up and then we're busing kids. So it would be nice to sort of know where those are. I mean, I know where they are, but the public may want to know where that is. Any other comments from our trustees before we move off of this topic and close this this meeting?
I had one comment. I would just say, like in general, anyone that's listening or on this call, that if there's, we still haven't gotten a lot of feedback. And so if there's still people that have strong opinions, then reach out or fill out that Google form online, because we've just had a couple comments every meeting.
I'll just follow that up and push people instead of push people to the Google form, because I know we all get sort of copies of that and comments on that versus if someone reaches out to individual members. The Google form would be great because that would then go to the consultant as well. So any other comments?
Have we sent, just real quick, have we sent that Google form link like via our, like specifically that link via some sort of messenger or email? If not, can we?
And just as a fun note for those watching and listening or following this, we will have those maps posted by Wednesday, because we have to have them posted 7 days before you consider them. So those that want to see the maps that were discussed tonight, they'll be on the district website, I believe on Wednesday.
Great, thank you. And just to recap, we are scheduled to actually vote pending our extension request on August 26th. So the maps will be up the revised maps will be up by this Wednesday. We'll then have ample opportunity to discuss and then vote on the map on August 26th. And then that goes to the county committee for approval, which is happening in September. And that would all meet our 90-day window. So pending an extension, then we have more time. But other than that, as stated, we had previously requested an extension, but were denied. So anything else that other comments related to this?
Actually, President Chin, you mentioned the 26th free, I miscalculated. 7 days before that is Thursday. So the maps will be on the site by Thursday rather than Wednesday.
Okay. Obviously, one extra day would help for a buffer. So if you could do it Wednesday, that would be great, but we understand. Yeah. Okay. With that, do you have everything, Dr. Johnson, Rosendo, and Superintendent Ochoa? Great. Okay. Well, at this point, we're moving on to our last agenda item, which is our adjournment. Let me just make sure that is correct. And does anybody want to make a motion?
Before we motion, can I just also encourage us as board members to share this on our social media accounts, because we do have people that follow us there. So yeah, and then I'll motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Thank you, Trustee Corzo for the motion. Trustee Watkins for the second.
How about, are you doing a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry, was that not, Trustee Corzo, would you like to just confirm your motion for adjournment? Or just restate your motion?
Okay, I will motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Thank you, Trustee Corzo for the motion to adjourn and Trustee Watkins for the second. Roll call vote, Trustee Corzo?
Yes.
Trustee Proctor?
Yes.
And Trustee Watkins?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We will see you next time.